Hi again, this is gonna be part 2 of this. Of what if Boba Fett joined the Clone Army. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And of course, happy Pride Month. And I have PPSW's channel in the description below, so you can check out his channel. And let's continue with part 2.
Along with Mace the same way, Boba, as Shaak Ti expected, saw the worst of the war. His first battle was terrifying. They had to land at a landing zone and they were smacked with bombardments from enemy mortars. The local population also served alongside the CIS, so not only were they fighting off droids, they were killing off civilian militia, or whatever they were. Boba showed his skills during the battle, which Anakin took note of, but he was genuinely concerned for Boba's well-being. While Ahsoka was getting closer to 16, Boba was only 12 or 13 years old, and war was a lot to inflict on him. But similarly to Shaak Ti, he couldn't really deny that all the clones were pretty much the same age, so he couldn't give Boba special treatment because he looked younger than all the other clones, which were technically younger than Boba. Anakin did make sure that Boba was given leaves of absence. Sometimes he'd have Ahsoka, Fives, or Echo bring him back to Kamino with them for a couple rotations. It would be through these slight side missions where Boba and Omega would reunite, and they were able to talk about the things they learned. Boba became quite the mechanic, being that he was always around Anakin or Ahsoka. Omega, on the other hand, became more familiar with the scientific methods used by the Kaminoans and the new battle droid variants. The Kaminoans were training their ranks with B2s, Commandos, and Magna Guards, as well as, of course, B1s and Droidekas. Omega spent time pulling them apart and figuring out what made them click, which she gave the info to Boba to help him in combat. This dynamic worked really good for the brother and sister union. While Omega never had any desire to go to the front lines, she kept learning any piece of information she could to make sure that Boba was safe whenever he was on the front lines. Also, not for nothing, Anakin made sure Boba was excluded from extremely deadly missions, like Umbara or their trip to the Citadel. This allowed Boba to get the full soldier experience while also stay safe from missions that required the elite legion of the clone army to do its duty. Boba's first truly devastating loss was Echo, when they went to the Citadel. He wanted to blame himself, even though he wasn't there, but it was Ahsoka who reminded him the cost of war. While she didn't agree with it, it was Anakin's lessons that she used to calm Boba's mind, and help him understand that there was nothing he should blame himself for. It was out of his control. What became odd for Anakin was his tight relationship with Boba. The two of them were very similar, and because Boba wasn't a normal soldier, he stayed close to Anakin and Ahsoka most of the time. This is where he learned most of his mechanical skills and understandings. Sometimes Anakin would show Boba how to do work on clone vessels or Jedi starfighters. It would be here where he and Anakin developed an almost father-son-like relationship. While Ahsoka was like Anakin's little sister, it was Boba who became almost like a son to him. The clones typically were much more knowledgeable, plus they looked and acted like they were Anakin's age, whereas Boba was entirely his own age. This relationship really filled holes in Boba's heart. Boba's relationship was extremely strong with Shaak Ti, but he hadn't found someone to fill in where his father no longer stood, and Anakin developed into that. For Skywalker, he didn't think too much of it. Similarly to how he was with Ahsoka, he was with Boba. Their bond really flowed naturally, and there was no reason for him to feel uneasy about it. It also became part of the reason he kept Boba away from more stressful or deadly combat arenas, which were becoming more and more frequent. Though an unexpected twist would occur while Boba was on Coruscant. His friend Ahsoka, who similar to Anakin had filled in a familial role in his life, was forced in the Jedi Order. Boba's little family away from Kamino felt like it was falling apart. Ahsoka was like his big sister, and it brought Boba all the way back to his thoughts after Geonosis. Though just as Shaak Ti let him speak about his feelings on the matter, Boba let Anakin voice his issues. The two of them rambled to each other about their issues with the Jedi Order and its council, and the disbelief of how they could be so neglectful of one of their best members. Or just agree that she was responsible for a bombing she had no part in, especially because she wasn't on Coruscant. The fact that they were able to shred the Jedi Order through a healthy rant helped the two of them the most. Anakin did lean more against the Jedi Order because of this, but getting his frustration out in a healthy manner did a lot more for him than not. The best part for the two of them was the fact that they were rebuilding a broken ARC 170 while they did this. Sure, the clone mechanics could have done it, but Boba suggested they do it together so they could take their mind off the result of the trial and Ahsoka's decision. It inevitably was what helped them out the most. There would be more conflict before Boba was sent back to Kamino. He would tell Omega about the experiences he had, which she did feel bad for the Ahsoka trial, but she had information that she believed he would find interesting. Omega didn't want to tell Shaak Ti until he came back home, but she learned that every clone trooper had inhibitor chips inside their heads. He asked if they did too, and she shook her head. They were completely unaltered clones, per Jango's request. Though she was worried, if the Kaminoans put chips into every clone's head, then they could control the Grand Army with a flip of a switch. Boba agreed, that was very bad. But what could they do? Sure, they could tell Shaak Ti, but would she handle it right? Not that they didn't trust her, but the truth is, Boba and Omega knew how stingy the Kaminoans could be, especially the outsiders. They already kept secrets from the Jedi, so why not do their own investigation? Omega was really hopeful that her brother agreed to this. She missed him dearly and desperately wanted to spend more time with him. This could be a good way to do it. Boba kind of got the sense that she felt this way, so he agreed, telling his sister that they would start tonight. Their quiet investigation had them following around Kaminoans, sneaking in the labs and invading Lama Su's office, but they found nothing, so they decided to try again in the morning. Their attempts were proving to be relatively futile. It was almost impossible to get a hint of truth, but it went to show why the Kaminoans could hide everything from the Jedi Order. 3 days after their investigation had started, they still hadn't found anything, causing them to start losing a bit of hope, though Omega had an idea. She was able to grab some of Nalase's data chips before they left last night. The two clones used these codes to pull together information left in Lama Su's hard drive, including transmissions to Sereno and personal notes in Lama Su's handwriting confirming that the individual they were talking to was Dooku. The two didn't know what they should do, but they decided that telling Shaak Ti would be the best course of action. She reacted immediately by informing the Council of this development. With the information that Boba and Omega had, they were able to confirm that Dooku was involved in some form of the creation of the clone army, which encouraged action from the Council to trace the recording and find Dooku himself. While Omega and Boba wouldn't be involved, the Council would come across Dooku and Grievous in a manner of which they were unprepared for, causing the death of both Separatist leaders. To the Sith Lord, this was troubling, but he had Newt Gunray, who was moved to fill the role of Separatist leader.
No, just have Dooku and Grievous died like early in the war. Come on. The war hadn't gotten close to being done, and yet both Dooku and Grievous already killed, really?
It could be controlled. He was a frightened individual, so he'd bend at the knee to keep any power he could, which made him the perfect rabid cur. Though Sidious was fuming, he was able to trace this event back to the Jedi learning of everything on Kamino, thanks to the Council blatantly telling him that Dooku had been in contact with the Kaminoans. The Council, while keeping information from Palpatine, revealed it to him once they killed Dooku and Grievous, so it wasn't like they told him and then made their move. They waited until they thought they had control over the situation. Sidious needed to work quickly, firstly, to protect himself on Kamino, as well as elongate the war. So he was going to the city himself. He was aware of Shaak Ti, but he planned on using Nalase's secret landing platform. One of his royal guards would drop him off, and he would speak to the Kaminoan leadership. He was furious. Everything was going perfectly. How could the Kaminoans mess this up that badly? It didn't even remotely make sense to him. They had done so well up until this point. 12 years of perfection. So he was going to Kamino for a number of reasons, but the most important one was to make sure that everything was secured and under control. He couldn't be risking this operation. The meeting was established as Shaak Ti was running training exercises over the ocean for aquatic events, so she wouldn't even be inside Tipoca City while Palpatine was there. Not like he'd be walking through the halls as it was. Nalase had a secret passage that went to a restricted area in the building, one where the clones were not allowed to be, so a secret landing platform and a secret area. Though there was an issue. Despite Omega and Boba being proud of their work, they were even more suspicious of the Kaminoans now. Their loyalties lay with their brothers, Shaak Ti, Anakin, the Republic, and the Jedi. So if the scientists were trying to hurt their brothers by siding with Dooku, then something had to be off. A lot of this resentment came from Boba, because he still halfway attributed the death of his father to Dooku. But there was a slight twist. Omega overheard Nalase talking about a meeting with another ally later in the evening. The siblings weren't going to inform Shaak Ti because they didn't believe this individual was coming to Kamino, but something felt off. Instead of doing as they did last time, and finding out late, they used some of Boba's mechanical skills. You know, lefty-loosey to open a vent, climb in, righty-tighty to close it. The two siblings crawled to the vents looking for any sign of the possible ally. They eventually got over to a crowded room. It was full of Kaminoan elders, scientists, and workers. Lama Su, Tan Wei, and Nala Se were all present. Omega and Boba looked at the Kaminoans as they waited impatiently. There was a circle on the floor. Omega had seen it enough times as she traveled through the tube with Nala Se before she was introduced to Boba. Omega looked to Boba with a worried look on her face. There was a weird vibe about all of this. A quiet beeping sounded off as the floor hissed, slowly opening up and revealing a pod, and out from it walked a shadowy creature. Sidious spoke quietly, but his voice was direct. He wouldn't come out to Kamino if he didn't have a good reason to do so. Sidious was here to make sure the Kaminoans kept a tight leash on themselves. While Sidious could very easily maintain this call from over a hologram, he wanted to make a show of force. From his left, one of the Kaminoans were lifted from their feet as he choked them. Sidious spoke methodically, telling them that they were supposed to deliver plans for more executive orders, but if they slipped and let everything loose, then his plans could fall through. Palpatine explained that whichever order turned the clones against the Jedi needed to remain within the confines of this room. He didn't know Order 66 by name yet. He still didn't have the political leverage he needed to use it, so he informed them that to win this war, they needed to be with him. He needed the leverage to win. He snapped his finger and the Kaminoan he was choking died on the floor next to him, as another one was lifted up at the same time. He dropped from his sleeve a red lightsaber and ignited it, telling the Kaminoans that if they messed this up again, he'd make sure that it was the last thing they would ever do. He stepped forward and dragged the lightsaber across the floor, as he snapped the neck of another Kaminoan. His blade raised and he told Lama Su that this was his final opportunity to save his people. This would be very beneficial for the two of them. They get infinite credits, he gets infinite power. Win-win. He turned back and continued monologuing, but the twins turned to each other and said they needed to tell Shakti now, which they did. They moved through the vents quietly as Sidious continued speaking to the Kaminoans. He planned on a very brief visit, simply inspecting how the Kaminoans planned to maintain their secrecy during this operation. Shakti, as she did before, informed the council of this development. All she knew is there was a hooded man choking Kaminoans and threatening them with a red lightsaber. To Shakti, this was reason enough to believe it was a Sith Lord. She had a gunship drop her off at Taboka City, as the light cruiser moved over to bomb the secret landing platform that Omega told her about. Omega and Boba moved out of the vents as Shakti ran to the position and made sure they were alright. Her first care was to make sure they stayed safe. She was going to go in and stop that Sith, telling them that she informed some other Jedi in the vicinity of Kamino. Shakti broke through the restricted area as she looked down the hall to see the Kaminoans with Sidious. They were cowering in fear as Shakti ignited her lightsaber, telling the Sith Lord to stand down. He frowned, raising his hand, and Shakti watched every single Kaminoan rise from the floor before she was thrown backward by a shockwave through the force. She slammed outside the restricted area as a couple clones ran to her position to help her up. She looked over as every Kaminoan in the room had died. Sidious could have no loose ends. The Sith Lord launched across the room as Shakti barely defended herself. She backed off as the clones tried to fight off Sidious. Most of them didn't have weapons, so they were forced to fistfight the Sith Lord, which only resulted in imminent death upon ignition of his second lightsaber. Sidious cut them down as he focused on Shakti. He threw her back into the wall again before moving to escape through the hatch. Now that the clones were involved, he didn't need to be here, but as he tried to get it to activate, it wouldn't turn on. The light frigate had bombed the platform, making it useless, meaning it couldn't escape. Shakti removed her robe as she steadied forward. More clones poured over the area as they heard the commotion. She told them to steady themselves. Some clones had their armor, others missing their helmets. The rest were wearing their regular red uniforms.
So now it's basically like Order 66 on Palpatine now, how great. or if the Jedi actually could, Order 66 on Palpatine. Yeah, it's an early 66 on the Sith Lord now. How ironic. How ironic is that?
But they all had blasters. Shakti moved in front of them, holding her lightsaber out as Sidious turned back. He'd have to fight his way out of the city. He stepped forward, dragging two lightsabers across the indented floor, as he told Shakti that once he killed her and escaped, there'd be no survival of her order. The clones looked to her as she told Sidious that she had no intention of letting him escape. He lunged forward, and she did the same, this time prepared to face his attack. Their blades clashed in the middle. She moved high and low to defend each strike as the clones used every little opening to make an attack. But Sidious was masterful, using the walls to leap around his opponent. Shakti kept pace, striking at him where she could, but more or less holding her own. The Sith Lord could see where he was struggling at the most. The clones were providing adequate cover and fire for their Jedi general. He locked his blade against hers and deignited the other as he used electricity to fry the clones trying to shoot him. She shoved forward and pushed him back. Sidious smiled at her, telling her that she was doing good, pushing her to use her anger. Shaak Ti deeply breathed, looking back. Most of the clones behind her were on the ground. Some were still conscious, but the rest were not. Shaak Ti was then blindsided by a strike as she stumbled back, blocking the rapid strikes from Sidious, who could see her settle back into her Jedi element. He mocked her for it, telling her that she would have made a fine Sith, but she blocked it out. She knew what he was doing, and she would not make a fine Sith. Shaak Ti slipped backwards, ducking behind a wall as more clones came down the hallway firing at Sidious. He blocked their shots, lifting them up and throwing them backwards, before continuing to engage Shaak Ti. She was becoming weak, but she could sense the presence of an ally. One of her fellow council members was nearby, and he had just arrived. Shaak Ti batted Sidious's strikes away from her stomach, as she threw Palpatine's non-dominant hand back. He laughed, slipping his dominant blade forward and out from his sleeve, the ignition going straight through her stomach. She dropped her lightsaber as a voice from behind her called out her name. Sidious scowled as he pushed her off his blade. Clones kept coming and surrounding Master Agan Kolar. Some were his own men. Sidious really wished that he remembered his executive orders, but he didn't need to because the war wasn't where he wanted it yet. What a tragic issue in his own mind. Sidious lunged forward and struck at the Jedi Master, who backed up, seeing the end of the fight before calling out Shaak Ti's name. He used his masterful abilities with the blade to push Sidious away from him. The clones fired at Sidious. He moved out of the way as he used the force to stop their blaster shots mid-air. He then focused back on Agan Kolar, who struck with precision and prowess. He was able to get Sidious off balance as the Sith Lord used the force to throw his blaster shots back at the clones, killing them all. Sidious smiled as Shaak Ti tossed Master Kolar her lightsaber. He grabbed it in mid-air, igniting the weapon and spinning forward, blasting Sidious back. Agan was an aggressive duelist, and Sidious got angrier as he pressed forward. The Jedi Master saw this coming as he ducked and weaved, using both his blades to his advantage, cutting one of Sidious's from his hand. The Sith Lord drove forward, jabbing at Agan's stomach, but the Jedi placed his hand on the ground and used the momentum to kick Sidious in the throat. He coughed and ducked, dodging an almost lethal strike, but Agan spun around and shoved his blade through Sidious's chest. The Sith Lord heaved heavily as he moved back slightly. Sidious tried to strike forward, but he couldn't. His eyes turned back and Shaak Ti had her arm outstretched, stopping Sidious from landing a killing blow on Agan. Sidious then dropped dead, and she too fell victim to his blade. Before Shaak Ti died from the same strike that killed Qui-Gon Jinn, she was approached by the twins. She told them that she might never see them reach adulthood, but she could tell from their hearts that they would become extraordinary people. Shaak Ti was proud of them for who they had become now, for what they had survived. They would persevere any challenge as long as they had the courage to face it, whether it be alone or together. They would make a change in the galaxy. Shaak Ti knew that, and she would die peacefully knowing it, holding both Omega's and Boba's hands. Shaak Ti's sacrifice would lead to a great change in the war. While it would continue on for another extra year, it would do so because Newt Gunray. He figured out midway through the final year of combat that he was withholding reserve forces, but by the time he realized that he had them, it was too late. All he did was prolong his inevitable failure. Sidious and Dooku kept these reserves a secret by changing the algorithms inside the machines of the Techno-Union, Trade Federation, and so forth, so they never knew. It was a quote-unquote clerical error, though on a more rewarding note, Anakin and Padme had their twins during this time, Luke and Leia, before the third year of combat ended. Obviously, Anakin still had to fight in the war that followed, but after learning of the loss that his boy Boba and his sister Omega suffered on Kamino, he couldn't imagine letting Boba go the way he did his own little sister, in other words, Ahsoka. So while Boba and Omega were grieving, he and Padme brought them out to Coruscant and gave them a proposition. While Padme was already a new mother to 2 children, her and Anakin didn't mind the idea of adopting Omega and Boba. They were sweet children, one of which having bonded with Anakin really well, but they had no place in the galaxy at this moment. Sure, they had the Grand Army and Boba had served with it well, but they didn't have an actual family. Their family was always Shaak Ti, and without her, Anakin wanted to make sure they always had someone. The twins thought on it for all of 3 seconds before they agreed to join the Skywalker Amidala family. Anakin wouldn't be around for a lot of it just because the end of the war was very stressful, but Boba and Omega had each other. They had Padme, and of course, They had 3PO, who had a lot to say about anything. When the war was finished, Anakin left the Jedi Order to live a life full of...
Yeah, hey, what about R2, huh? Skywalker's droid? Yeah, 3PO, but with Skywalker, Skywalker's R2 unit.
love and happiness with a very large, happy family. Though, as Shakti said, Omega and Boba would have a tremendous effect on the galaxy. They'd be the largest reason behind the clones getting fair and human rights after the war ended, ones that didn't force them to become equatable to droids. Omega would take up studies in the scientific field, and it would be her that would make scientific breakthroughs that created medication to heal millions, as well as stop the accelerated aging for the clones. Boba, on the other hand, would create a garage, but he would be known as the individual to develop one of the great vessels for hyperspace travel. Quicker, more efficient, and didn't require as much fuel, though he maintained a permanent presence in his garage. Being that Boba and Omega were so much older than Luke and Leia, the Skywalker twins had plenty of inspiration around them as they grew up. Jedi General, Senator, scientific mastermind, generational engineer, it was quite the family.
Yeah. Indeed it is. And also, Ahsoka Tano, right? Your aunt. Your Jedi aunt, Ahsoka Tano, as well. So don't forget Ahsoka.
Luke would follow along right with Boba and Anakin, where Leia would choose a more political lifestyle. Each of the children would be taught the Force, and while Boba didn't exhibit signs like the others, he enjoyed the quality time he had with his newfound family in the ever-changing galaxy. And that, my friends, is our wholesome PP story. Again, special thanks to all of our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Alexandra Reese, The Beginning and End, Django Fat Clone, Nick5098, IMTJ Recluse, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galavic Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granity Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewa670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tam, Johnny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Galaxy 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Photos Legacy Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, The Man with 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. Forceborn channel, smash that like button, support my ways, check out the Patreon. Cool things on there like early access to videos for Master of the Tier and up. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. So I wanted this one to really focus on the relationships of Boba with other clones. And I know a lot of it focuses on his relationship with Omega, but I think that's like the only way you could actually get Boba to care about the clones. He did not really care about them. He didn't consider them his brothers. And so you kind of still see that throughout the video, but I wanted the emphasis on him changing his ways, coming from Omega, who is also a clone, which he would technically consider a lesser being than him. And so all this radical change that comes from him comes from his relationship with Omega. And this really all goes into the theme of what Star Wars is, which is found families. And so that was kind of the fun part at the end, which is a lot more rewarding than ending on Shakti's death, which just broke my heart. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.
And then I want to react to these two videos later on today or tonight. What if Anakin deleted the security recordings after Order 66? And what if Chopper was Skywalker's droid? Great. But yeah, this one I'm like, why in the movie, like, why didn't he think about deleting them anyway? Like, you don't want to get caught, so doing that, like, why didn't you delete the recordings? But anyway, I might react to them sometime later on today or tonight. But yeah, bye for now. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And yes, happy Pride Month. I'll see you next time. Bye.